Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to go back to history, but recent history, and talk about the developments of Catholicism and Protestantism right before World War II and right after World War II and its effects that we have today. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sicut eram principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. Just so you know, sometimes I like to wear cardigans with no shirt. That's why I look like I'm wearing a robe a la Star Wars. But today we're going to talk about the trends that led to the rampant proselytizing evangelical movement of the last half of the 20th century and how it was primed to pick off Catholics. So many of you know the history of Catholicism in America, starting since the colonial days. Maryland was founded by a Catholic. Calvert, I should say. Carroll was the first bishop over there. Lord Calvert was a Catholic, and Maryland was established as a Catholic colony. But really, Catholicism's history didn't really start in America until maybe the mid-19th century, when we started getting the first influx of immigrants, which was mostly the Germans. And the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants didn't really like this Catholic infusion. But wait, it was going to get worse for them. So if you look at the turn of the century, around 1900s, that's when the Italians started coming and the Eastern Europeans. So we got the Slovaks and the Poles, and they're all very Catholic. And the Irish, of course, who were coming earlier with the potato famine. And so if you look at the early 1900s, there were a lot of Catholics in America. But the thing was that they were second-class citizens. They were treated poorly by the Anglo establishment. And many of them didn't know English, and they had to take up jobs like in factories, so they got into a lot of the unionized labor jobs. But one of the kind of ancillary benefits of this was they remained very close, kind of like what you still see with the Mormons and the Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews, is they really still stick together. So if you look at 1925 Chicago, for example, you're going to see these very vibrant neighborhood Catholic parishes, and they're almost always going to be ghettoized from the larger establishment and kind of centralized around their ethnicity. So you'll have the Lithuanian Catholic Church, the Polish, there are tons of them in Chicago, the Polish Catholic, the Italian Catholics. And so the thing is, they were very close, large families. Many of the families had priests that were connected. Many of them had women that went into the convent and were active nuns in the parish. And it was a very vibrant community, and it was necessary because the outside world was not the most hospitable to Catholics. So they kind of turned inward, but had a very vibrant faith. Now, during this time, the Protestants were going through their own kind of tumult, in that there was a division. You think it's mostly clearly seen in the Scopes monkey trial of the 1920s, this separation between, I guess you would say, the fundamentalists and the more progressive mainline Protestants. Now, I have a Instagram account called Catholic_Protestant, right? I post pictures every day of a church, and you have to guess if it's Catholic or Protestant. There's a link in the episode notes if you want to. But the mainline churches, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, and all of them, were taking a more liberal stance slowly but surely. Really bloomed into fruition now with open lesbian and homosexual clergy and embracing gay marriage and all these things like that. But even in the 1920s, they were embracing more of the liberal mindset. And the fundamentalists in their churches did not like this. They were more literalists and fundamentalists. So they were essentially kicked out of these mainline churches, and they kind of were wandering through the 20s and 40s, and kind of just localized churches, kind of ghettoized too. And then what happened after World War II? World War II was fundamental, very fundamental in terms of the dislocation and movement of Americans, mostly because of the GI Bill, and it was just a great time of prosperity because we were the only superpower that wasn't destroyed. And so you saw the GI Bill giving education to people essentially for free. So you saw a lot of the urban poor, whether it be Catholic or Protestant, go to college and become accountants and attorneys and business professionals, whatever, and they had the money to move out to the suburbs. And one of the ancillary benefits of that for the Catholics is and this was like an unintended consequence, they left that kind of hive of vibrant Catholicism. And of course, back then this was the Latin Mass, they only had the Latin Mass. Very vibrant community where there was a lot of what the Protestants would call fellowship, but there was a lot of community, there was close families, extended families, everybody knew each other, And you got to the suburbs and it was different. And the fellowship was gone, the local community flavor was gone. They moved into the suburbs with other people of other races, other denominations, Protestant and so forth. And so you see a lot of these churches being built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in suburban America. As Father McTeague says when he interviewed me, the host of the Catholic Current, Our Lady of Suburbia parishes, how hideously ugly a lot of them are. And that's part of the inspiration of my 7-part series, Liturgical Abuses That Drive Me Crazy. But you see a lot of Catholics were detached from their faith. They almost lived in an exclave, where before they lived in an enclave, now they live in an exclave, and they're primed to start losing their faith. And plus you think this is the 1960s, the time of radical social transformation on so many levels. So they're primed for that. Now with the Protestants, the fundamentalists were kind of ghettoized too, but there were a couple of fundamental works that were written by fundamentalists that told them go out and evangelize. And one of the kind of the leading components of this group would have been Billy Graham, who's probably the most famous. And Billy Graham was an ardent and very successful evangelical speaker. And that's where you kind of get the birth of the modern American evangelical movement, was in the late 40s. And so their view was go out and get. Go out and get. So they had a very ardent and very fervent evangelical bent. Go proclaim the word, bring people to the fundamentalist view. They looked askance at mainline Protestantism because they felt like mainline Protestantism sold out, which was true. They were right on that. So what happened is you have this bad concoction for Catholics. You have isolated Catholics in the suburbs who are detached from the kind of like the hive. They left the inner city where they were very close and very connected to their faith, out to the suburbs where they're kind of more isolated. You see this played out in Mormonism. You see this played out in a lot of these kind of hive groups. And then you have these evangelicals who are just wanting to bring people in, and wanting in particular to bring in Catholics and other people they perceive not to be true Christians. And so you have this phenomenon for the last third of the 20th century, even continuing to today, of Catholics getting picked off by evangelicals. And a lot of this happens because the Catholics are not well catechized, and they've kind of fallen away from the milieu that they used to live in. And so these evangelicals, why do you worship Mary? You worship statues, blah, 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 blah. The church is the Pope is the Antichrist, da, 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 da. And so they're getting all these questions from these evangelicals that they see as being very fervent and very passionate in their faith, and quoting the Bible, the Bible, the Bible. And these Catholics are already kind of susceptible to this, not only because how they're away from the hive, but also because of just the radical social transformations that are going on in the 60s and 70s. And so you saw a lot of the Catholics getting picked off, so to speak. And that phenomenon continues to today, but not so much. I think that you see that there's more Protestants coming to the Catholic faith. And the phenomenon I see, and I kind of talk about in that episode, Protestantism is lazy Christianity, is that you see like the more intellectually minded Protestants who actually investigate the faith and so forth, they eventually become Catholic because, like Cardinal Newman says, those who read history cease to be Protestant. And then you see kind of the watered down Catholics are the ones that leave the faith and either go to evangelical because it's very emotion based and they don't understand the Mass, and so they go to the services where there's music and praise, and then they feel something. We have an episode on that whole don't be deceived and seduced by the feeling part of your faith. And so they'll go over there. But yeah. So guys, I just want to do a video on that. Post in the comments. Let me know if you can relate, if your family went through this similar experience. I can tell you that my family went through this experience for sure. hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.